Hello, my name is Denise Serino, and I would like to present a concept note as my final assignment in MSHA 501. My study was done on flooding and riverbank erosion along the Jamuna River in north-central Bangladesh, and I took an anticipatory action approach because I think it's the most appropriate for this particular crisis. The words that you see were spoken by Bokul, a woman in Bangladesh who lost her village to riverbank erosion. And it was her story, as well as others, in a research project called Gabika that was the inspiration for my choice of Bangladesh as a study. And you can see here, this is a district along the Jamuna River, and this is flooding from this year, July. So recent flooding is continuing to happen today. The country of Bangladesh supports a maze of rivers that flow from countries to the north, and that includes China, India, and Nepal, down through the multiple outlets leading to the Bay of Bengal. It is estimated that from the three main rivers, there are over 700 tributaries that extend through the country. Because of this network, Bangladesh is much more susceptible to extreme weather events. And this concept note will focus on two of these weather events, flooding and riverbank erosion, and how an anticipatory approach to addressing these crises, ongoing crises, can truly aid the Bangladeshi people. So you can see here in the map, the region that we're talking about. Here's the three main rivers that flow into the country. And right here, Jamuna is the one we will be addressing. The country itself is about 80% floodplain, with over 75% of the land below sea level. A current flooding map taken from ReliefWeb just in August this month shows the current situation with flooding. And you can see a lot in the northern part of the country and along our river here, also areas of extreme flooding due to monsoonal activity. The map on the left is showing again riverbank erosion, and this was from an academic study, and you can see right in here, this blue area, this is where we're looking, and there definitely is evidence of riverbank erosion. On the right, again, flood inundation map of Bangladesh that is current. So several factors have brought the country of Bangladesh to this point of frequent crises. The first one being the onset of more extreme weather events due to climate change. Also, rapid economic development that has drastically changed land use and structure, most notably in the case of irrigation, which is now much more widespread, and agriculture is now full year versus when it was just seasonal during the monsoons. Past interventions that were brought over to help stabilize riverbanks and prevent issues from flooding proved to be unsuitable in this environment. And so those have not gone the way that people had hoped they would have. Change in water use in the northern countries has affected not only river flow, but also river quality, contamination, and making those water sources unusable. The result of this is disruption of livelihoods, creating cycles of poverty and displacement. And I thought this was very interesting, a picture of the river itself and just the extent and the number of people, 30 million that are supported in the region. The Jamuna is one of the widest areas drained by any riverine system. So this is definitely a big system that we are looking at. Also, I thought this was interesting. I found a hazard map of Bangladesh, and again, in red here, riverbank erosion, which pretty much directly maps to pockets of social deprivation. And you can see there is a strong correlation between the two. Anticipatory action, what is it? It is the act of acting ahead of a predicted hazard to prevent or reduce acute impacts before they fully unfold. In order to have an effective anticipatory action, three things need to be in place. First, the event must be predictable through forecasting with ample time to initiate the response. And this can happen in the case of certain weather events. There must be a plan in place prior to the trigger, and that will enable organizations to move quickly with both measures and resources. And finally, funding sources should be pre-established so that once the action is triggered, there's no delay in getting people, money, and supplies in country. The reason I believe this type of humanitarian action is the most effective for the crisis in Bangladesh is that monsoon events such as floods, heavy rains, and the erosion are annual occurrences and can be roughly predicted as far as when and where. There's also an historic record, and people have a living memory of those past events. And the second one I think is very important. Mitigation activities can take place outside that specific time of crisis when there's not as much chaos on the ground. This also allows the local community to engage a little bit more, take ownership, and you can access some of the local resources that might not be accessible once the crisis is in full swing. Sources of funding outside the standard humanitarian action channels, I believe, could be accessed. I found a lot of academic research, and there are both nonprofit and profit companies that are looking for ways to mitigate climate change. And so these, I believe, would be options for funding for anticipatory action as well. An example of this that's already happening, the OCHA portfolio already has Bangladesh as far as flood and cyclones in their activated file. So let's break this down. Number one, predictable. The monsoon season in Bangladesh is usually June through October. And although that can fluctuate a bit, it is a well-established pattern and would allow for prediction of a potential humanitarian crisis. With the increased heavy rain and flooding, does come the riverbank degradation due to high water levels and flooding. There are many studies that I found that have measured both level and rate of erosion, and these could be used to help predict zones of increased danger and help get people away from those destroyed riverbanks. Again, the population is very familiar with these events, and their wisdom, their knowledge of their land could also be very useful in predicting. As far as a plan in place, I had to break this up into two different segments, both for flooding and for erosion. So the plan for the flooding event, once the prediction has been made, if a threat is imminent, I think the first thing we do is contact local authorities in the region to confirm the forecast, the scale, and the location. Check to see what measures have already been taken and what else needs to be done. First thing to do is ascertain number of people and households are under threat. What is the scale? Within those households, are there any vulnerable community members that would require extra assistance or any kind of special help? And in this conversation, understand the plan of action that is already being taken by the local communities so that our work can dovetail into that. In that same vein, contact other aid organizations to determine another level of outside response. Get your team ready to get on site. Ensure that the resources you need are either in country or on the way. Once you're on the ground, confirm the location and safety of the community members. Determine if any rescue operations are required, if people are missing, if people are injured, and set up a communication center so that there is one location where people can bring concerns and emergencies. Check the status of shelters and supplies. Determine what is still needed and find out if it is available and where. Coordinate within this communication with other aid groups and create your shared response. This includes having the clusters meet and establish what action plan needs to happen. Again, local community leaders, super important to bring in. And then as the situation unfolds, continue to monitor to ensure continued safety of people and, if possible, property. As far as erosion, this one is a little bit trickier to see because we often think of erosion as something that's long-term over time. But you can see from this quote that has long-term impacts and that land is not recoverable naturally. So it is a crisis for the people who live along the rivers and the char communities. My plan would have to be twofold based on time. During the monsoon season, I think daily monitoring of the zones that are known to be vulnerable to flooding and close to homes and agricultural land. In those areas, reinforce as possible with local materials. Stay in contact with the population to ensure that they are knowledgeable of the potential threat, and maintain your shelters and supplies to use. In the off season, when it is not the monsoon season, I think working closely with the local community too, or at least being involved in their efforts to build embankments and revetments, would help provide a permanent solution and reduce future humanitarian crises. To do this, utilize the multitude of studies and all the previously collected data to determine best practices. And finally, the last step, funding. Upon confirmation of the imminent threat, get a hold of your donor organizations and have them write the checks. You would have established these funding sources prior to the event by talking to aid groups, by talking to people interested in climate change and the situation in Bangladesh, and sharing the benefits of what an anticipatory action can do for people. As I stated, OTRA already has a active anticipatory action plan. The World Food Program does as well, and it was initiated just this year as the biggest anticipatory action support provided so far. I think it's important to remember that the river is not a beast. It is only sometimes a threat to local communities. It is also often the main source of their livelihood. Any mitigation, any steps we take to help must take into account the changing nature of the river and how our interventions would affect its course and flow, and thus people's lives. My rationale is that I was able to find several ongoing plans to address both flooding and erosion situations in actually all through Bangladesh, most focused in the north central and northern parts of the country. There are a lot of organizations already working on this. In fact, the Bangladeshi government has established a Delta Plan 2100, which is a 100-year plan that started in 2018 to address just these situations in the entire Delta and is supported monetarily by the government. I also found multiple research papers that look at specific districts and even villages to help them work on erosion and flood control and management. Another rationale, Bangladesh is considered one of the most vulnerable countries in the world as far as the effects of climate change. With all the rivers and the large delta, the country is highly susceptible to extreme weather events that ruin lives and disrupt livelihoods. For those making their living along the rivers, these events can lead to poverty and legal trouble, often resulting in displacement, emotional distress, and social isolation. Millions of dollars are lost each year due to the destruction of crops, livestock, and what I found interesting, the agricultural resources needed to rebuild or continue production, such as seed and soil. With anticipatory action, there is an increased potential to save those dollars that can then be used to improve lives and build independence and dignity within the population. I found this also interesting. The three central rivers that come into Bangladesh all originate outside the country's borders, and therefore they are not solely regulated by Bangladesh. Water resource management, as we've seen in the American Southwest, is a transboundary watershed, is extremely difficult and can be a major factor in establishing a long-term sustainable plan. There will have to be a dialogue with these other countries to fully develop something sustainable. And a quick note, I do believe I would be amiss not to mention the current situation within the government of Bangladesh right now. Protests recently have resulted in violence causing 300 deaths and at least 20,000 injuries, and the former prime minister has resigned and left the country. The interim leader, Muhammad Yunus, is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and his work has focused on those impoverished. So as Bangladesh continues to transition into a new government and deal with the effects of climate change, I think it is encouraging to see a strong presence in leadership for humanitarian causes in the future. I thank you and leave you with the faces of Bangladesh.